good evening. I've got a little bit more information and update. The situation has been resolved. A little more information about how it transpired. I talked to a couple of my detectives at the command post, and again, very preliminary information is that an individual who was at the scene told us that our suspect had started the barn on fire. And when neighbors came over to assist, not knowing why or how the barn was on fire, and apparently the suspect had been firing a gun throughout the day, but just target practicing, not necessarily shooting at any person or anything other than targets. So the individual told us that when the neighbors came over to try to help, he actually he had been depressed and acting strangely, and actually started shooting at the individual who lived on the property and the neighbors. The individual who lived at the property actually evacuated one of the neighbors. The other neighbor is the one who was on the scene that we had to tactically extract during the confrontation. As I told you earlier, we confirmed he was in the house and that he was moving about the house. Hostage negotiators got close and tried to make contact with him. He completely refused to acknowledge our existence or in any way communicate with us. At least that's the initial information we got. We tried over and over and over again, and he just would not acknowledge. So we went to try to take him into custody. I'm not sure exactly what transpired. We're still going to have to talk to the deputies because the deputies on the scene are still at the house and finishing up a search of the house and so forth. But preliminary information is at least 2 deputies fired their weapons. We're not sure yet if the suspect fired his, and the suspect is down. I'm not going to release his condition just yet until he gets a little bit more information. But the situation is totally resolved at this point. The suspect is no longer a threat and is been taken into custody. So, I don't know if I can answer any other questions. Again, give you a little more information about what happened prior to us getting there. But again, that's very preliminary, and detectives are in the process now of trying to do a neighborhood canvass and double check that all the neighbors are accounted for and get any information they may have about what transpired just prior to and during the shooting. So
what's the message for the community at this point?
Well, the message to the community at this point is that especially this particular area, there is no more danger. The individual is no longer a threat. We definitely believe we have all the victims accounted for. And so at this time, the situation is resolved. Unfortunately, we could not resolve it peacefully. There were shots fired, and as we get more information about exactly what happened with the interaction with deputies, we'll be releasing that. FDLE was actually already on the scene, an agent, a representative, along with the state fire marshal and ATF. We had several representatives from several different agencies here, so the process is going to be very long to go through doing the investigation with the fire, as well as the deputy involved shooting with FDLE. They'll be taking over that portion of the investigation. But as I said, there was actually an FDLE agent on scene during the latter part of this event. So
to clarify the initial interaction, he set the barn on fire and people just came over to try to help, and he shot at those people?
That's our preliminary information, yes. It was almost as though, you know, again, I haven't talked to the individual, and so I don't know, and I haven't talked with any of the witnesses, but it almost appears as though he either did not want them to extinguish the fire, or it was set deliberately to lure people in to shoot them. Of course, we may never know exactly what was going through his mind at the time.
Just to clarify, he was shot by deputies?
He was shot by deputies, yes.
Did that happen after they made entry into the house? Or?
Well, we had initially breached as I told you earlier, we had breached and sent some electronic surveillance in and determined that he was still inside. and then we tried to use some other methods to try to get him to come out. I've heard a couple different issues. Maybe he had come out on the porch and confronted deputies, but again, that's extremely preliminary. I wanted to let everybody know that it has been resolved, and as we get more information about exactly what happens, working with FDLE and the state attorney's office, we'll get that information out just as quick as we can. The more specifics about our interaction with him at the very end.
Did he point or present a firearm at deputies?
I'm sorry?
Did he point or present a firearm?
Again, I would that would be an assumption on my part if I told you that, because I haven't talked to those deputies. All I know is that preliminarily, the commander told me that we believe at least 2 deputies fired their weapons. Again, I'm not even sure. He may have fired on the deputies, but I don't know that yet.
And Sheriff, you said the suspect is being brought into custody. Can you clarify if that's jail or the hospital?
Again, I'm not going to release his condition just yet. We have some other things we have to do before that, but suffice it to say that he is no longer a threat to the community. So.
Any update on that second victim that you didn't have a condition for yet?
No, I asked just as I'd left, and I haven't got any information that it has gotten any worse. But the second victim was pretty serious when he was taken out of here.
And this area has been locked off. You mentioned residents were evacuated. What's the status of that now?
We're going to be working towards getting things at least in the general area back to normal, letting people get back to their houses after we interview them to see if they have any information about what transpired. But again, there is absolutely no threat to the community from this particular scene. We will likely be holding the scene overnight and either start processing it now or working with FDLE to do the processing in the morning at first light. Okay.
How frustrating is that neighbors rush to help and then were the victims of this crime?
Yeah, how quickly?
Or how frustrating is
Oh, how frustrating, yes, absolutely. And I think, again, we talked about active shooter, and I didn't know exactly what the sequence. I did know the barn was on fire. I didn't know it happened prior to them being shot or at the same time or after. But if it was set intentionally to lure people over, and to cause more victims, that's very frustrating, and it just goes to show that even when you're trying to do a good deed, if somebody is either seriously mentally ill or has criminal intent, you have to be very careful. So.
Are you able to clarify if the victims are men or women?
There's the victims that have gone to the hospital. I think the first victim may have actually even been released already, the one that self-evacuated. But there was a man and a woman. The woman is the one that was self-evacuated, and the man is the one that's still in hospital. Can't really say more than that for Marcy's Law reasons. Okay. All right, thank you all very much. Just pay attention to our social media feed and media releases, and if there's any additional information that we can get approved to be released from FDLE and the state attorney's office, we'll get it out to you as soon as we can. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Sheriff Al.
Voy, espera un momento, ¿ok?
Sheriff Al Nienhuis speaking here, giving an update about half an hour after the previous press conference in Hernando County. Just we'll get into here in a moment how this all began, because I think that was perhaps the most eyebrow-raising component to this press conference. Excuse me. But the suspect is down, taken down, of course, by deputies who did discharge their firearms. In this case, 2 deputies firing their weapons after the drone that made entry to the home where this suspect, Stephen Russo, was barricaded. That drone was unable to establish communication with him because, according to Nienhuis, the suspect here refused to acknowledge officers or deputies in any sense. So here's the way that Nienhuis describes it. At some point this afternoon, at this property in Hernando County, in Brooksville, the man on here on the right side of your screen, Stephen Russo, is accused of starting a barn fire a barn fire that started to get a lot of attention from people in the area. Now, exactly why he started this fire, according to Nienhuis, is unknown, but that he was also firing shots in the area at the same time that was believed to be perhaps target practice. But when the suspect started the barn fire, people came over to assist. And Nienhuis, in his words, describing that he either didn't want people to extinguish the fire or he wanted to attract attention. For whatever reason that he had for starting this barn fire, he got into a confrontation with some of the people that noticed this and actually came over to the property to figure out what was going on. And then, of course, you have shots being fired, a man and a woman injured, one person more seriously than the other. But of course, a very chaotic situation that was marked by perhaps what Nienhuis is describing as a mental health episode. We were talking about whether or not there was a mental health component to this case before this press conference. The word was depressed that Nienhuis used, that he was possibly experiencing depression. And that's, of course, leads into this confrontation that occurs on the property when we have two people that are shot allegedly by Steven Ruza. They, of course, tried to use the drone to talk him into surrendering, but he was not able to comply, not able to acknowledge deputies that were trying to talk some sense into him, I'm sure. And then, of course, we have him being taken into custody as a result of two deputies firing their weapons upon making entry to the home itself. You don't ever want to see a situation like this resolve with further use of weapons, but in this case, and of course, there will have to be a subsequent investigation, and of course, we'll be following along here to find out more. But deputies made entryway to the home tonight, encountered the suspect. They did not say whether or not Steven Ruza was armed. That, of course, information will come out. Why the deputies fired their weapons will, of course, come out in a subsequent police report. Why they felt that it was necessary for them to fire their weapons, and whether or not they felt that their life was in danger in this moment, in this encounter with the suspect. But just the entire situation a bit bizarre in how it started with this barn fire that was allegedly set by the man here on the right side of your screen, the suspect in this case, and then, of course, people paying attention to it, and that leading to a confrontation as to why the barn was on fire to begin with. Just a very bizarre beginning to this story, and an unfortunate ending. And we can only hope, of course, that that the injuries do not culminate in a fatality in this case, both in regard to the one suspect who's the one victim that is more seriously injured, and of course now the suspect in this case being injured by deputy gunfire as well. I'll do my very best to answer some final questions before we hop off here on this live stream. I'm seeing a lot of people commenting about mental health in our comment sections. We talk about it all the time here on stream about how common it is for these stories to have a mental health component of some kind, a mental health breakdown of some kind. If you use hashtag HAB with your comment, I can animate your comment on screen, or I can acknowledge it out of the Facebook Live or YouTube Live comment section. We'll be wrapping up our live stream here in the next couple of minutes now that the situation has been resolved. But again, the very latest on this story on WFLA.com, the WFLA app, the latest coming up tonight on your NBC station here in Tampa Bay, Florida. WFLA News Channel 8, your 11 o'clock newscast coming up in less than 2 hours from now. Facebook, not seeing too much. We'll go over here to YouTube Live. Kayla, hashtag AJ, was the shed on fire, and that caused the injured victims to go check it out? And no, as it was described by the sheriff, Kayla, so the barn was on fire. That caused a significant amount of attention. Neighbors, people who were paying attention in the area came over to the property. There was some form of a confrontation, and then we have the allegation of shots being fired and 2 people struck by gunfire. That's the way it was described by Neen Heiss. Lorraine with a good question. Hashtag KJB. Were there animals in the barn? We can't say that there were. We should ask more questions about animals when it comes to stories like these. Of course, there's always an emphasis placed on people, both from a suspect standpoint and a victim standpoint. Whether or not there were animals in the barn, whether or not it was an active barn, or whether it was a barn that was, that was mostly empty. That wasn't something that came up in this press conference, but it's an excellent question, Lorraine. Also, too, were there animals inside the home where Russo was said to be barricaded as well? Megan McQueen, hashtag KJB, a mental health component and a gun component. Whether or not he was said to have multiple firearms, whether or not these firearms were legally allowed to be his, what his criminal history looks like, if there is a criminal history, whether or not he was legally allowed to possess these firearms. All of these questions fair to ask in the aftermath of what has unfolded tonight in Brooksville. Not seeing too much other questions, comments. Jennifer says, hashtag JB, thank you for your coverage. Go home, enjoy your weekend, sir. I encourage everybody here to have a happy, healthy, and safe weekend. It's been a little bit of time since I was last on stream. So it's good to see all of you joining us here on Facebook Live, on YouTube Live, interacting with us live here on WFLA Now. The very latest on this story, it's on WFLA.com, the WFLA app. We'll have the very latest for you tonight on air tonight as well. And also, too, you can follow me on my social media accounts at WFLAJB. I'm really paying a lot of attention these days to Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and Twitter, and all for different reasons. All those platforms have their respective strengths. Of course, I'm here live with you as well on YouTube. We do a lot of our live streaming activity here on YouTube as well. It's really those 5. On YouTube, you can follow us here at WFLA News Channel 8. And then on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook, you can find me at WFLAJB, where I post a lot of different content on different platforms at different times, because social media and all these different platforms are so unique in their own ways. And it's about connecting with those audiences in the way that is just best for those respective platforms. So I hope everybody has a terrific weekend, a happy, healthy, safe a weekend wherever you are watching us from. We are really going to pay very close attention to this story, and as we get updates, we're going to share them on air and online. Again, the headquarters for all of Florida's biggest headlines, breaking news alerts. It's WFLA.com. Thanks so much for joining us, folks, and we'll see you next time here on WFLA Now. Have an excellent weekend.